All right. All praises be to the Creator. We are back. Probably gonna hear some babies in the background today because we're moving around. We're moving around. We're doing some stuff, y'all. But I did set this for 4 o'clock, so I wanted to go ahead and pop in. Give me 1 second. Let me push up this door. The conversation is getting started. It's getting popping. And, I've gotten some interesting feedback. So I thank everybody who has taken their time out to share their thought processes on the matter and some interesting feedback that's able to give me a understanding not only about what is being said, but how it's being received. And by extension, you know, how each and every individual, because we can send a message out there, but then the the person who receives the message and then sends it back is going to determine how much they have really understood about the original intent. You know what I'm saying? That's in anything that we do. That's in every and anything that we do. We can say one thing and then it becomes something totally different in the mind of the person. And so that's not always the fault or the responsibility of the person who is formulating or posturing a thought, but we have to keep those things into consideration. And this is why I think open discussion, respectable discussion is important. I've gotten some feedback that made me go, wow, okay. You know what I mean? Like, oh, okay. So this was going on. Some made me laugh a little bit, but then I realized, what, this is something else. This is something else that is attached to this current movement. So for those who just joined me and who may be new to the channel, let me just share a little bit about who's talking. And I ask, sometimes, you come new to a channel and you don't know who's talking or what's going on or where the person is coming from. And that's understandable. That's understandable. So what I'm going to do right now is share my screen just so you can get an idea. And then I'm going to jump into the forgotten connection, the link between the Caribbean and South Carolina. For certain purposes, unless I'm doing a personal discussion, I try not to rely heavily on my personal opinion. So almost a large majority of percent of the time, if I say something, just know that I'm going to come with something to back it up. You know what I mean? Because that's just the type of person I am. But understandable, a lot of people may be new, so I get that. I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, I'm going to share. Okay, this is what we're going to go over. But before we do, I'm going to hop on over here just to give you a little tour. The other day I gave you a tour of the Soul Center, of the healing material that I have created over the years and put together and put in a form to help others who may come along, who may need a starting point on their healing journey, right? There's individualing, because there's individual healing and then there's a collective healing of a collective trauma, right? So there's so many things that are involved, but I'm a proponent of the individual first getting in touch with the things in their personal lives that may be affecting the way in which they see the world around them. If you come to the channel, if you do have time, you will be able to click on some of the playlists that I took an opportunity to put together. Some of the things that interest me, some of the things that we've done in times past. So you're going to see things like self-improvement. You're going to see that was many, many years ago. And still, that's what I talk about. You're going to see things such as this, which is melanated conversations, where I had discussions with, and on the channel of Brother Philippe Matthews. And you'll see me talking about willful ignorance in the melanated community. You'll see me talking about cleansing your body from racism, melanated mental illness, PTSS. Some of these discussions were suggested by others, and I participated in with it. We're going to have me in discussions of white poverty versus so-called black poverty. Hold on. Again, you're going to have me just having a lot of discussions around Kaepernick, around a whole lot of things, mental slavery, things of that nature. So that's one of the things you will find. Another thing you will find is this conversation about double jeopardy of the melanated woman, speaking about this thought process around how the melanated woman in the 70s here in the America mainland was so interested in throwing away their family and attaching themselves to the European woman. And so myself and Sister Mayana, we came across a Black woman. It's so quotes, Black Women Manifesto, and we took the time to comb through that. Then there's the Left Project, and then I'm gonna go on. You see this? 126 videos. I'll go ahead and click on the Left Project. The Left Project is something that I started in 2016, which was about highlighting and going through collectively some of the trauma so that we can process it. A lot of this stuff is stuck in our DNA, it's stuck in our mind processes, it affects us, but we are so busy trying to live that we don't take the time to necessarily go over what's happening or what has happened. And so this Left Project was 1 full year. This is March the 1st. So that was in 2016. I started at the beginning of January 2016 and ended December 2016, where 1 full year, we went through different narratives that we read collectively and we had community discussion. I would say not a whole lot of people showed up, but those people who did show up benefited from it. And so this is what you will find here, Left Project information. This is all the work that was put in concerning the Left Project. And all the time I invited people to come and read. I had a few participants. Here's one of them where we read Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. We read 50 Years in Chains by Charles Ball. We went to a melanated bookstore here in town, Essence of Knowledge, and we did it there. The newspaper came in and covered what we were doing with the Left Project. We read the account of the slave trade on the coast of Africa. We actually interviewed one of the brothers, J.C. Hughes, who was able to do his genealogical report and tracking, and he was able to find that one of the people who we were reading was actually one of his direct descendants. So you can click on that video and check that out. I say all that to say, for those who may be new and who are just, we did a lot of review of all of the movies that a lot of people were like, oh, I'm so tired of these slave movies and the slave fatigue, and I don't want to see any more Roots, and I don't want to see any more Underground. And we still kept having that conversation, even though many people expressed their discomfort with having the conversation and not really want to look at it. So you see, I reviewed all seasons of Underground, as well as the Roots reboot movie, and took a lot of backlash for it. You know what I'm saying? Read over, Plantation Owners Journal, and there's so much more. But this is just a few. As you can see, I'm still scrolling. I did some videos where I knew some people would just want it concise. I don't have the time in the day to sit down and do all that I would want to do, because we have to work and do some things outside of this capacity. So I had to slow up a bit. But this particular video was some findings that I found on some places that what would happen on New Year's Day, according to some of the reports. And so that video is up there, talking about slave food, talking about colorism, talking about why white women desire so-called Black men, all of that. So this is just some of the work put in. And I just needed to, sometimes we need a little bit of historical context of who's talking and why they're talking, and whether or not they're just talking because they want reparations. When I hear stuff like that, I think it's funny. You know what I'm saying? I'm not offended in that respect. What really bothers me to a certain degree is I didn't even know that this was actually going on, where hatred and indifference was being stirred up on site. I didn't know that part. You know what I mean? So some of what I experienced just in this short time of having a discussion, I'm like, whoa. You know what I mean? That part kind of took me aback, like, huh? But because I speak about soul improvement, and because I've, to a certain degree, gone on my own journey, I'm not highly offended or getting in my feelings. I know how to go back and forth, and you might see me, a little bit in the comment section, asking questions and going a little deeper, but I'm not going to pop off and call anybody out their name. That for what? You know what I mean? So I would ask that for those who come, just, respect due, and then we could have a discussion, and then wherever people fall, that's where people fall in the discussion. But there's no need to be rude, disrespectful, or necessarily project preconceived notions on others when we don't take the time. Basically, no need to assume when we can ask questions, when we can have respectful dialogue, when we can clear the record. So the other day I spoke in a video about the connection between the Caribbean and South Carolina. And what made me want to do this was one of the interactions, and I want to thank him. Let me see. Hold on a second. Hold on, let me make sure the rice, speaking about South Carolina, let me make sure the rice is turned down. Hold on one second. Right, just leave it alone. It's okay. All right. Thank you for that. Today I'm just getting ready, so I'm be not not all over the place. I'm gonna try to keep this concise and clear. So I got some feedback, and one of the pushbacks was on the video that was done, the one before this, which is talking about hold on, I don't want to what's behind the numbers, historical context. And for those who heard the video, I didn't make that up. That was actually the title within the report. So I got some pushback that wasn't necessarily based on what the report was saying. All I was doing was reporting on what the report was saying and saying that if we're going to bring forth a number, no one is arguing against no arguing against the injustices that have been done to melanated brothers and sisters here on the mainland. Nobody's arguing against that. What I brought out in the report is that if we're going to use numbers, if we're going to make assertions, then they need to be based on fact, especially if the facts are in the very reports that we are given. So that's why I adjured everyone to go and do their own research. I always put the links that I have in the boxes so that people can do their own research and not have to hear me or listen to what it is necessarily that Kamuna is saying. Let me see here. I'm trying to get to the pushback I got concerning South Carolina and the Caribbean connection. So that's what I have. I have a treat for you about South Carolina and the Caribbean connection. Hold on. And so it's under the video, so you can read that at your own discretion. But hold on one second. And the brother, thank you, King Ra, for letting your thoughts be known. He was a bit confused saying whether or not I was consciously or subconsciously going between melanated people for African American or Caribbean American. And because of what he already experienced in other spaces, he thought that I was trying to slight. That's not the case. My thing is, I don't call people black. If you look, I don't like that designation. I don't like that term. I don't subscribe to that term. However, when I'm reading a lot of data that has all of these different variant names, then this is where you may find that it's a bit cumbersome to navigate in and between all of those names. Okay, so that I explained that I did that, but here's what I want to speak to. He says, I feel Caribbean people should try not to focus on creating language. No, that's not the part. Hold on, no, that's not the part. I asked him if he got a chance to read the entire struggle about Caribbean Americans stealing the labor and sacrifice of the ADOS counterparts and not contributing to building Miami. I already shared that. So if you missed that video, go check that out. And this was his response. Even if they helped build Miami, South Florida is damn near the Caribbean Islands anyway. So that's discounting. First, it was said that this is disparaging numbers and that this is wrong, X, Y, and Z. So now when evidence is shown that, wait a minute, they were actually there at the ground floor of the building of Miami, now that's diminished. And now it goes on to say, South Florida is damn near the Caribbean island anyway. What about the rest of the landmass, the inventions, intellectual property? If you carry the conversation this way, it's going to make you look like an enemy to the ADOS agenda. Mainly due to the fact, I don't know why, that's not the first time I heard it. Why, when one is speaking and engaging the discussion, do you have to become an enemy? You know what I'm saying? I'm a little bit confused about that. Maybe I'm not understanding why that has to become an enemy because you're asking questions or because you're clarifying something that may have been misstated. He went on to say, mainly due to the fact that we were on foot off the African continent. So there was no African, Black, Negro, American, or Jamaican, Trini, Brazilian at the time. We were Black folks being passed around and traded like property items. So all this South Carolina Black folks, this is the contention. So all of this South Carolina Black folks may also be Jamaican and so forth. I mean, try telling them folk that. My grandmother from Virginia tried telling them folk down there that. So we should focus on getting on code and getting in compliance with every group's agenda. And then he goes on. So I wanted to address that because I did make the statement and I wanted to give the resources or the sources for why I made the statement. And the reality is that there's so much we the people don't know. From Caribbean to America, there's so much that we've been disconnected from. And there's so much that we have forgotten. So in an attempt to substantiate what I said and allow anybody who may be out there to bring forth their research to disprove the fact that I said that there were melanated bodies who didn't necessarily come straight from the continent, and that there were known and on record melanated bodies coming from the Caribbean and then coming to America. That would mean that these melanated bodies at that time were enslaved in the continent, in the Caribbean, and then again enslaved here. So my point for making that statement is that there is a connection, and then at some point there was a disconnection. Remember, I'm not forwarding any agenda as it relates to ADOS or trying to attack anybody. What I'm saying, what I have been doing for all of these years, is providing evidence that people can go and search for themselves. So without further ado, the forgotten connection, the link between the Caribbean and South Carolina. Give me one more second because I forgot my word. When I come off, it's going to be time to get ready. All right. All right, here we go. It's not going to be too long, hopefully. Hopefully, it's not going to be too long. And then I'll come to the comment section. Make sure everybody can hear me first before I get started. Come to the comment section. All right. All right, here we go. The slave trade into South Carolina before the revolution. All right, there's a number of books that I got these from, and I have to go back. I put the link for this presentation that you're watching now in the box, and I have to give you back the links for the books. But it says that slavery would be accepted labor system of South Carolina was unquestioned for its earliest settlement. To planters coming from Barbados, Jamaica, Antigua, and St. Kitts, slavery was the accustomed order, the bringing of slaves into the province, the natural and desirable practice. As early as 1670, mention is made of a Negro here. In 1671, Sir John Yeamans had carried Negroes from Barbados to cultivate his Ashley River plantation. In 1674, Mr. Percival was instructed to, quote, begin a trade with Spaniards for Negroes, end quote. A curious fact, since the newly organized Royal African Company of 1672 might one suppose have desired to supply all the slaves then necessary. Look up when you get a chance, Royal African Company. And I was saying before that there were people or companies commissioned or who won contracts to provide slaves. One of those contracts was called Acentos de Negros, where they would say, hey, I would provide you with 100 slaves a month or 1,000 slaves, enslaved Africans for the year. And so this is testament to the fact that this type of arrangement was happening, and a lot of these companies were formulated and incorporated by the crown and given permission to privately trade in bodies and flesh. Okay, one would suppose have desired to supply all the slaves then necessary because, like I said before, there was a monopoly. A lot of companies wanted to have a monopoly, or crowns wanted to have a monopoly on the slave trade. From this time, from 60 years or our information as to slaves and the slave trade in Carolina is meager and may be briefly summarized and dismissed. I'm going to continue, but my point in this particular one was that in the beginning of the settlement of South Carolina, who, by the way, is on record for where 40% of the melanated bodies who entered this continent came through South Carolina. That port in Charleston, South Carolina, we're going to continue to read. And so they were saying when it first started, when they first started making bring incentives for these people to come and settle the land, they were getting the slaves not from mainland Africa, but they were getting them from Barbados, Jamaica, Antigua, and St. Kitts. So that would mean that there was a population here from those places who were already slaves in those places. Let me continue. Gullah, this is from, again, this is the author here, Frederick G. Cassidy, Gullah and the Caribbean Connection. I spoke about the Gullah the other day in my video, spoke about being able to understand their dialect. Okay, boom, let's read. In several papers, Cassidy, 1980, 1983, and 1986, and then they're giving the references. I have explored the connections between South Carolina, especially Charleston and the Sea Islands, and the Caribbean, for the light such connections may cast on the origin of Gullah. So they wanted to, for their own research, everybody have reasons why they do their research. They're trying to see the connection between those melanated bodies that were in the Caribbean and the Gullah who were over here. The question of origin must take into account historical, social, and linguistic factors. My past focus has been on the linguistic evidence. This paper focuses on the social and historical evidence. And here's the part I underline. There can be no question that there was a South Carolina Caribbean connection. And then the person goes in to speak as a speaker of Jamaican Creole from childhood. I was immediately struck when I first discovered Gullah by the many similarities of the two idioms. And they go on to make their point. I'll continue. You can look up this book if you want and read more, Gullah and the Caribbean Connection. I believe that's the chapter in the book. Another outtake, as the first important English colony in the Caribbean, because if we know a little bit of history about Barbados, they're going to talk about, they call Barbados Little England. Okay, this is where Barbados is at the west, at the east, the what do you want to call it, westernmost tip. Okay, so when you're coming in off of the coast of Africa, these are the islands that you're going to hit first. And Barbados is one of them where it was a testing ground. So I'm going to keep reading. As the first important English colony in the Caribbean, Barbados first settled in 1624. Became a testing ground. White indentured servants from Ireland, Scotland, and in smaller numbers, England, proved unable to adapt to field labor in the tropical climate. Besides, many hoped to become sugar planters themselves after they had worked out their period of indenture, and they were thus unlikely to supply a long-term source of labor. Following the Portuguese, from whom they had heard about sugar production, the English planters turned to slave labor as the solution. But Barbados is a small island, and the good agricultural land was soon taken up. Listen good now. Some would-be planters turned to Guyana, which is South America, right? 1651 to 1667. Others went to Jamaica after that island was taken from the Spaniards, 1655. Thus, Jamaica became an area of overflow for Barbadian planters. Remember, all of these is under the crown, English crown. And the colony of Charlestown, founded in when? 1670, on the Carolina coast, soon became another. So they were flowing over. Barbados is a small island. Then they started going to Guyana. These are the Europeans. And wherever they go, they're going to try to establish these business ventures using free labor. And then they flowed over into Jamaica. And ultimately, those same planters who were leaving their English places and Scottish places and Irish places to come and try their luck in the New World. Okay, it says here, Charleston, which would be South Carolina, founded in 1670 on the Carolina coast, soon became another. Listen good. An early pattern was formed with connecting lines from Barbados to Jamaica, from Barbados to Charleston, and further lines between other Caribbean colonies. When Suriname became Dutch in 1667, Suriname is in South America, the majority of the English planters there moved with their slaves to southwestern Jamaica. So when I said that they were not on just one island, and you have accounts from people being broken up from their families from one island to another, here is some proof of them saying that this was the practice, okay? Let me know if you're with me, if you're following along so far, if you can hear, you know, shoot, give me something in the chat so that I'll know that you're hearing and everything is all good, okay? After early pattern was formed with connecting lines from Barbados to Jamaica, Barbados to Charleston, and further lines between the Caribbeans, when Suriname became Dutch. Okay, I read that. The majority of the English planters there moved with their slaves to southwestern Jamaica. And when the Charleston colonists began importing slaves to work on plantations, they got them from Barbados and Jamaica. And then the person says, I want to emphasize that was in the early years. So the very foundation of those who were coming over were not coming straight from the continent. They were what they called seasoned, quote, slaves who were already here from earlier on being enslaved. So this is showing a connection. And I'm going to show you where the disconnection begins to happen. So let's continue. By 1690, the Charleston planters were no longer dependent on Barbados or Jamaica. They obtained their slaves directly from Africa. Listen, there was a switch now. So for 20 years, from 1670 to 1690, they're getting all of their slaves from the Caribbean islands. Now we're going to find out why they stopped doing that. And then after that, they've decided to wanting to go to get it directly from the continent. Though this weakened the pattern of connections, hold on, let me go back. Though this weakened the pattern of connections, the pattern held to some extent into the 18th century, meaning they switched suppliers, but they didn't totally cut the supplier off, but they switched suppliers. It says, let me jump down. When the Charleston colonists began importing slaves to work on plantations, they got them from Barbados and Jamaica. Okay, I read that part already. Hold on. Okay, there is a 1697 notice of the sloop Turtle bringing slaves, quantity unknown, from Barbados to Charleston. Also, a 1709 report from the governor and council of South Carolina to the Board of Trade mentions, we are also furnished with Negroes from the American islands, chiefly from Barbados and Jamaica. These may, of course, have been transship slaves and not ones who already lived or had been born in Barbados or Jamaica. So they're like, we can't really prove that they were in these particular ones from this particular manifesto. They could have stopped over or they could have been there. They don't know, so they made a mention of that. I'm going to continue. Two other factors further weakened this early pattern of importing slaves from New World colonies. Okay? One was the Barbadian and Jamaican planters' preference for Gold Coast slaves. So they were switching between where you were based on the knowledge base that you brought with you. It says the other was the Charleston colony shift to rice as the chief crop. When you look at the slave history of the slave ships, you would find that depending on who or what they wanted you for would determine where they got you from. And there are also evidence that if you came from one region, they would give you rice. And if they came from on the ship as slave food, and if you came from another region, they would give you yam, whatever you were accustomed to. So when they switched to rice as a crop product, they went to get people who had the knowledge of how to grow rice, because rice is not the easiest thing to grow. I'll continue. Okay, so there was two reasons. One was the Barbadian and Jamaican planters' preference for Gold Coast slaves, because what were they growing in Barbados and Jamaica? Sugarcane, right? And what are they growing on the eastern seaboard now? They're trying to grow rice. We have to remember that at each step in the process, the cash crop changed. In the beginning, the cash crop was what? Tobacco and indigo. And once they depleted the soil, then they found out that in certain low countries, they could grow rice. So they tried to grow rice. And when that was problematic because of malaria and everything else, what did they say? Oh, chill, we're going to go deeper south. We can grow some sugarcane down there, and we can grow what? Cotton. And then cotton became the cash crop. It says here, so they switched. Okay, as to first, both the English and the Dutch had established trading posts, called it factories. I shared that before, on the Gold Coast as early as 1630 and more actively by 1650. In 1640, the English chartered the Company of Royal Adventures. Its new charter of 1663 mentioned for the first time that slavery was one of its objectives. So everybody was running to get in the slave game. especially the English, who before they were sitting on the sidelines, and when they seen everybody getting money off of it, that's when they decided to jump into the game. Okay. Again, for those who just joined us, what am I showing? I'm substantiating a claim that I made before, that there was a sometimes forgotten connection between the Caribbean and those who are here on the mainland. Okay. The company was succeeded in 1672 by the Royal African Company, which traded along the entire West African coast. Figures on importations are more than fragmentary, but it seems clear that gold clothes slaves were among the first brought to Jamaica. So they were in vogue. Gold clothes slaves at a certain time were in vogue. And then again, when they went to new territories, they went for different types of people groups or ethnic groups. I said the other day that they branded our foreparents for, oh, BMW is known for this, and Volkswagen is known for that, and Ford is known for this. This is the same mentality they brought to our foreparents, and that's how they branded them. It says they never formed as much as half the total import, but they were always a considerable proportion. Sorry. Hold on, let me go back, make sure I didn't miss something I wanted to say there. Let me go forward. Again, I put the link in the box, okay? Of the Royal African Company trade goods sent out in 1724, more than one half went to the Gold Coast, Waiida, 1/4 went to Gambia, Sierra Leone, and the Windward Coast, and about 1/6 to the coast from the Benin southward. Since the trade was largely for slaves, this should give a fair idea of the areas from which they were being brought and in what population. Listen to this good. Thus, Gold Coast slaves were among the first to be imported, and they were preferred to slaves from the Congo and Angola. In Jamaica, the Coromantee, which I spoke about before, seem to have dominated the other slaves. Listen good. Coromantee was a port that was in Ghana. It was a certain temperament of people that came out of this particular ethnic group. And they were known for something. They were known for uprising. So listen good. It says the Coromantee seem to have dominated the other slaves. So there are other reports that say in order to deal with this, they didn't want to kind of mix them in the population. So Jamaica was a dumping ground for Coromantee Negroes, which what they would call them. And I'll look it up for you shortly after this so that you can see some of what the slave masters, the stigma that was on certain people were coming from the oppressor, the slave master. And what we, the people, did was internalize these stigmas, right? And then now we project them on one another based on how we were socialized, okay? In Jamaica, the Coromantee seem to have dominated the other slaves. Certainly the largest number of surviving African-derived words in Jamaican Creole speech today are from the Twi, the import Gold Coast language. The Coromantee showed an uncomfortable tendency to run away to the hills. There they established communities of the Maroons, who are still there today, which is a Spanish Portuguese word meaning essentially, they're runaways. So they have a whole Maroon community. Whence they would raid the lowland plantation. Perhaps, listen good, perhaps the fear of insurrection was what made the Charleston colonists in 1717 place a head tax of £3 on slaves brought from Africa and £30, 10 times as much on slaves who, quote, who had lived over 5 months in any other colony in America. So there was an incentive to get the melanated body straight from the continent, because the thought is that they would have had enough time to work together to plan an insurrection. So we see a split in the population. Remember, there were already a lot of bodies that came from another enslavement that came here that populated the continent, South Carolina. I'm speaking about South Carolina mainly right now. And so because of this, they made it more advantageous for the oppressor to go ahead and get those from the continent, because you would have to pay £30 if you got them from another colony. It says, nevertheless, it's certain that Gold Coast slaves were among the earliest in Charleston. So on the side, like I said, that is something that is notable, because this would have created, all right, Queen T, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in. this was something that's notable because this would have created a division not only among who was more prized, but who was also demonized here on the mainland. Those people from the Caribbean, they're gonna start some uprising. They're gonna. Why do you think that? Why do you think that the what is on record as being made up uh using like historical fiction, which is the Willie Lynch letter that a lot of people go to, the creator, if I'm not mistaken, of the Willie Lynch letter tells you that it's historical fiction. Those are on the internet right now. You can look it up. And then he talks about using these Caribbean slave master to tell you how to break slaves because they started it first. They were here already. And a lot of them just transferred it over. So again, I'll read the side. 1717, a duty of £3 for African melanated who came straight from the continent was assessed to kind of, it's a tax so that you wouldn't bring others who might spoil the bunch. I'll continue. This is back to the book that was talking about Gullah and the Caribbean connection. Hopefully for those who just joined us, all that I'm doing, I'm not starting any beef. All I'm doing is substantiating what I say. This is something, like I said, that has been my interest, will continue to be my interest. And if I could help in any way to share information that's going to dispel some disinformation, then I'm obligated to do so. It says the second factor weakening the Charleston colony link with the Caribbean. Hear what it said. The initial connection with the Caribbean was strong because the Caribbean melanated bodies, they're not from the Caribbean. They were dropped in the Caribbean. And these bodies that were dropped all throughout the Caribbean were what was fueling the slave economy in South Carolina in the beginning. But something was happening that weakened. So the person says the second factor weakening the Charleston colony link with the Caribbean was the shift of emphasis from sugar, which they would have been an expert in, to rice. This shift powerfully affected the formation and survival of Gullah. Rice cultivation was introduced in Carolina settlement almost accidentally. About 1680, Captain John Thurber brought some Madagascar gold seed rice to Charleston and, quote, gave about a peck of it to Dr. Henry Woodward, who succeeded in getting a good yield from it. The seed from the crop was then distributed among his friends. By 1690, the production had grown to such proportions that the planter asked that it, rice, be specified as one of the commodities made receivable for quitrents. Okay, and then it goes in to show that what was going on and why now you needed certain people. Let me just jump down. They talked about the issues that concern growing in low swampy weather and how that the Europeans couldn't really deal with that environment. It says, but so-called blacks seem to be immune. They always say that. And were therefore the ideal labor force for growing rice. Again, we're talking specifically about South Carolina right now. I'm honing in on South Carolina for a reason, because this was what I mentioned. Further, rice was already an important crop in parts of Africa, including the area of present-day Liberia and Sierra Leone. Slaves skillful in the kind of agriculture or this kind of agriculture were therefore sought after because of malaria. Whites stayed out of the rice plantations because, rice is grown in paddies and, mosquitoes and all of those things. So to recap, let me get some water. To recap on what I was showing, and hopefully I provided some information that you could go back and look for yourself, that when I say that I'm not trying to claim, quote, and that's why I was accused of this, which I thought was interesting. Claim African American so that I can get, or so people can do a land grab for reparations. I'm going to come back at another time, and I've done it before, but we're going to go over the HR 40 bill and really see what it's talking about and why we need to realize that it's more than, they're talking about way more than getting a check. They're talking about knowing this type of stuff. They're talking about understanding history and getting a handle on it for each and everybody that's involved. So to summarize the social and historical evidence, this is still from the Gullah connection. There was certainly a close historical connection and continuity in the founding of the English colonies, Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, Jamaica, and Charleston in the 17th century. It says Certainly. That means the claim that they didn't help to build the foundation and their bones are not buried here. Keep in mind, everybody was just scattered a few hundred years apart or decades apart. That claim is not factual. That claim is not factual because these bodies came from these other island colonies. It goes on to say, striking similarities among the Creole languages of the colonies cannot be accidental. The similarities imply some common source. 3, in the colony's early years before the plantation system was in full force, conditions for the development of Creole, because this person is proving the language, the continuity also between the language of Creole language did not exist since there were relatively few so-called blacks and they had relatively more contact with whites. After the plantation system was established and large-scale importation of slaves began, conditions from creolization were both present and compelling. And it goes on to say more. So again, read it at your own discretion. I have a few more. This book is from a book called Rice and Slaves. I left the book here on the side because then I realized that I wasn't, I had to go back and do double work. So I just decided to screenshot the whole thing. And this book is from Rice and Slaves. You can get that on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you see fit. This is an observation. This is why I say it's important also to read the business journals and the slave master journals and all of these things, because it's going to give us an insight. Okay. It says, as a white Georgian, so-called white, Georgian born in a so-called white supremacist society, he had, from one point of view, an eminently comprehensible outlook from another. However, his perception seems strangely blunted. A so-called white contemporary in the sister state of South Carolina evinced greater, perceptivity and attached meaning to the varied African background of the so-called Black population. I shared this the other day when I said the truth about so-called Black people, that there were different ethnicities and tribes represented. So this is something that I have said, and I'm saying it based on the research. Okay, it says the so-called race problem, he said, is not one of the relations of single Negro race, but rather one of a number of white races, meaning this is why they said the invention of white people. We spoke about that the other day after Baker's Rebellion, the invention of so-called white people and the invention of so-called Black people as a designation. This wasn't the case. This person says, and this is a European who's saying this, but rather one of a number of white races, i.e. Scottish, i.e. Irish, i.e. Dutch, i.e. English, with a number of Negro races, i.e. all of the different ethnic groups that you scooped together and threw together and just hurled one place, okay? It says the Negro population of the United States is probably as much mixed as the so-called white population. I'll continue. Again, that's from a book called Rice and Slaves. Lastly, and again, I got this from at least 3 or 4 sources that are saying the very exact same thing as it relates to this port is responsible for over 40% of the immigration or the forced migration of melanated bodies from both the mainland continent and their places where they already were oppressed in the Caribbean. Okay. Lastly, it says, hold on. It's talking about the climate of South Carolina and why they choose to make certain crops. Let me jump down. It says here, its slave code and even slavery itself was taken from British possessions. And this is true. This is also something that you can go to see that they developed these slave codes. If you go to the Code in the War and you go to these Black codes from Barbados, from other places, you will see that in some spaces they transferred it wholesale over here. And as time went on, they continued to tweak it for their personal environment. Okay. It says its slave codes and even slavery itself was taken from British possession in the Caribbean, especially Barbados, whence many early Carolina settlers came. Some years ensued before statutory precepts particularly governing definition of the institution, fell in line with those prevailing in more northernly English colonies. That, that is a short presentation of the forgotten connection, the link between Caribbean and South Carolina. I actually have one more that I put in the box for you. And this is coming from, it was a Negro taught them, a new look at African labor in early South Carolina. What is this about? The fourth witness. It's about the fourth witness now. Journal of Asian and African Studies. Okay. Peter H. Wood, the Rockefeller Foundation, New York, USA. Okay. Within this, it says here, let's jump down and you can read it. Again, I put it in a box so that if I'm going too fast, feel free to read it. But here it says, colonial South Carolina is an excellent place to begin searching the cultural baggage of early Black immigrants, so-called Black, for what anthropologists have termed, quote, carryovers, end quote. More slaves entered North America through Charleston, called Charleston until 1783, than through any other single port. And no other mainland region had so high a ratio of Africans to Europeans throughout the 18th century as did South Carolina. Early migrants from Barbados, they're calling them migrants, forced migration, and other places, and we learned that was Jamaica, we learned that was Suriname, where Blacks, slavery was well established, brought Negro workers, i.e. slaves, with them when they could afford it. In the initial years after 1670, because we just read that that's when South Carolina was established. However, most English settlers hoped to meet the colony's intensive labor needs in other ways. Attempts were made to procure a steady supply of European workers and to employ neighboring Indians on a regular basis. But neither of these sources could meet the demand. Within half a century, Negroes constituted the majority of the settlement's population, and additional so-called Black slaves were being imported regularly from Africa. Eventually, the population of the melanated bodies in South Carolina outnumbered the Europeans. And why? Because they were getting kickbacks. They were getting 150 acres of land for one male slave. I have to go get that. Hold on, it's on my other computer. I said I didn't want to make this to go too long, but they were getting incentives to bring with them to settle the land of South Carolina, develop it, and they were getting tracts of land, acres of land, when they brought slave bodies with them. So when the Europeans in the colonies, the Caribbean, saw that this was advantageous, they left their places there and came here and began to settle with the same slave codes that they developed where they were coming from. So hopefully, I know I got a little bit excited. For those who may be new to the way I deliver some of this information, sometimes some of this stuff gets me a little riled up. I get a little excited in delivering some of this stuff. And, you know, I always have, because this is wild. This is some wild stuff. But again, this is some of the stuff that we over time may have forgotten, or it wasn't passed down, or we didn't understand. And now when we hear it, it's like, what did she just say? You know, that was someone like, what did she just say? Oh, no, she's just trying to make an excuse for X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, here it is right here. Here it is right here. Let me read a little bit more. Yet in actuality, it's jumping down. Let me go. Wait. Let me read a little more. This paragraph right here. That such a large percentage of early South Carolina were Negroes have never been thoroughly explained, though basic contributing factors have long been recognized. European racism, colonial precedent, and the proximity of the African trading routes. No other workers were available for such extended terms in such large numbers at so low a rate. What low rate? There was no rate because you stole the labor, but I'll continue. Indeed, such slave labor has always seemed almost inevitable. And perhaps for this reason, the question of whether Negroes brought with them any inherited knowledge and practical skills from the African continent has seemed irrelevant to, quote, white historians. Though the anthropologist Melville Herkovitz challenged, quote, the myth of the Negro class, end quote, more than 30 years ago, the American historian has tended to uphold the legend that so-called Blacks had no prior culture of any consequence, or that if they did, little could have survived the traumatic Middle Passage. It says that this indicates that a few historians have considered some carryovers, but little attention has been given to the importation of any practical kinds of cultural information. Africans, according to this approach, were imported in spite of being thoroughly unskilled, or perhaps in part because of it. And it followed from this that the central chore which faced European masters was one of patience and one-sided education, so that, quote, ignorant, end quote, slaves could be taught to manage simple tasks. Which, you know, they're lying, because we just read that the reason why they went for certain people was because of their expertise with certain crops. Let me continue. Yet in actuality, something very different seems to have taken place. In the earliest years of colonization, slaves who had passed through the Creole culture of the West Indies demonstrated unsuspected talents. Within several decades, the necessity for labor of any sort led to an increase in the size and diversity of the Negro population, and a further variety of African skills emerged, which were strikingly appropriate to the lowland frontier. Slaves, therefore, were far from being the passive objects of white instruction. I just saw something the other day that talks about what's the name of the it's not rum, it's not Jimmy Walker. What's the name of the whiskey? That the whiskey, oh man, I just saw that the other day. Jack Daniels. That the person behind Jack Daniels was a melanated person who taught Jack Daniels how to distill that whiskey and train. There was a whole documentary on it. You could check that out. A lady is making it her life's work to resurrect that information and give credit to where credit was due concerning that whole Jack Daniels whiskey distillery conversation. Slaves, therefore, were far from being the passive. Okay, I read that. A process of, okay. Mm-hmm. And many of these workers, regardless of legal status, occasionally ended up teaching their masters. Same thing I just talked about. Africans, as will be made clear, sometimes proved knowledgeable and competent in areas where Europeans remained disdainful or ignorant. Hence, the form faced the white Carolinians during the first and second generation of settlement was less one of imparting knowledge to unskilled workers than of controlling for their own ends, lack expertise, which could, as Henry's case, be readily turned against them. And then you can continue to read more. I put the link in the box. So I'm gonna release my screen right now. Oh, I think I stopped presenting. So those are my, again, and I could go deeper, but these are some preliminary findings on the connection between the link between the Caribbean and South Carolina, the formation of South Carolina, who first stopped South Carolina, why I'm not just tripping or making it up for whatever reason we may think. And hopefully that this puts us on a trail. And now we understand from South Carolina, there is a major slave port or a major slave house. Hold on, I'm gonna tell you right now. Because I have some of these things on my list of places to visit and learn more about, okay? South Carolina. There's a whole place down in South Carolina where all of this, from South Carolina, people will come to these slave auctions and then take their slaves into all of these other regions, okay? And just to top it off, I was looking old slave market, right? Old slave market. Let's look at this together, shall we? Let me share my screen one more time. Hold on one second. I'm gonna share my screen one more time. Okay. Old Slave Market. The Old Slave Market is a building located at 6 Chandler Street in Charleston, South Carolina, that was once housed an antebellum auction gallery. Constructed in 1859, the building is believed to be the last extant slave auction facility in South Carolina. So this was constructed later on. We know they used to just, slap up shop and put you on the auction block and do their thing. So this is some, if you're in those regions, again, here's the Barracoon. If you're in these regions, check some of this stuff out. South Carolina has an African American Heritage Commission. Okay, let me go back. There's another article here from CNN. Charleston apologized for the city's role in slave trade. When I said that South Carolina was filthy rich, this was all kind of stuff was happening here, because this was, the Southern Black Wall Street. Wall Street. Like, this is where the bodies were coming in. There was Savannah, there was South Carolina. There was a number of slaves that came into, or enslaved individuals that came into Rhode Island. But because it's these ports, Charleston apologized for city's role in the slave trade. Here we go. Charleston, this was last year, 2018. Charleston, the South, let me make this a little bit. How about that? Okay, it's not trying to get bigger. Hold on. There we go. South Carolina, Charleston, the South Carolina port city, where about 40% of enslaved Africans who were brought to North America landed after being taken from their homelands, has become the largest city to apologize for its role in the slave trade. We just read, again, at different parts, they were taken from different places. In an emotional and at times heated meeting that drew a standing room only crowd, the Charleston City Council on Tuesday night approved a 2-page resolution in City Hall, a structure built by slaves, that its supporters saw as a step towards racial healing. The resolution, which was approved by voice vote and was met with loud cheers, recognized that the city had flourished at the cost of those enslaved and apologized on behalf of the city for its role in the trade. It also acknowledged wrongs committed against African Americans by slavery and Jim Crow laws. The resolution pledges city officials will work with businesses and organizations to strive for racial equality, and suggests that the creation of Office of Racial Conciliation to help the process of racial healing. But some people who spoke during a public comment period and council members who debated the resolution for nearly 2 hours questioned whether it went far enough to tackle systematic issues like affordable housing, economic development, and criminal justice matters facing the city's African Americans. Mayor John Teckenberg, who supported the measure, spoke on how enamored and intertwined the city had been with slavery. Do we have a reason to be sorry to apologize, he said, his voice unsteady? We do. Councilman William Dudley Gregory drew a comparison between children born into slavery who were separated from their parents and migrant children and parents who, under the current immigration policy in the United States, he said, quote, are being torn from their parents and put into detention camps, end quote. The resolution would be a way to apologize and move forward, he said. But other council members voted against the resolution, saying they wanted to see more tangible action. Councilman Perry K. Waring said he wanted more to be done to empower the city's African American community. As a descendant of slaves, I cannot support this resolution, he said. Councilman Harry Griffin also said that the city needed to address other issues first. Mr. Griffin abruptly ended his comments after the crowd interrupted him when he said he would not support the resolution. The resolution acknowledged that, quote, fundamental to the economy of colonial and antebellum Charleston was slave labor. Charleston prospering as it did due to the expertise, ingenuity, and hard labor of enslaved Africans who were forced to endure inhumane working conditions that produced wealth for many, but which was denied to them, end quote. Before the vote, dozens of people spoke in favor of the resolution. Some warned it should not be a last step, but one towards equality in the forms of opportunity for Black entrepreneurs and racial equality. In passing a resolution apologizing for slavery, Charleston, which draws several million visitors a year and is known for its cobblestone streets and antebellum mansions, joined several states and cities that have approved similar measures. Among them are Florida, North Carolina, Alabama, Virginia, Maryland, New York, Macon, Georgia, and Annapolis, Maryland. The vote on Tuesday came on the anniversary of Juneteenth, a holiday tied to 1865 announcement about the end of slavery. It is also came 2 days after the third anniversary of killing of 9 Black parishioners at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston by Dylan Roof. In an op-ed piece published in the Post and Courier of Charleston on Monday, members of Social Justice, Equity Collaboration, a group formed to address social inequality in the city, said the idea to seek a statement from council about slavery began a year ago. The group feels adoption of resolution will allow the city and country a healing moment. Again, this is New York Times. You can continue to read the rest. Oh wait, there's only 2 more paragraphs. I'll read it for you. Hey, shalom, everybody. Welcome to the discussion. We're going to come back and talk about it. Any questions you have, I'm going to leave all the links in the box, and I'm going to recap, okay? Remnants of Charleston's major role in the slave trade still exist today in the form of a museum. The old Slave Mart Museum, where slave auctions were held, recounts the city's role in slave trading and houses African-American arts and crafts. The city is also planning to open the International African-American Museum on the old wharf where slave ships were unloaded. Former Mayor Joseph P. Riley Jr. told the New York Times in 2016 that the shooting at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal pushed him to accelerate plans for the museum. And just because I'm nosy, I'm gonna click on the museum. Here it is. So if you're in this area and you would like to learn more, feel free to do so. Video it, write about it, blog about it, go ask questions, learn information. If your people is from here, somebody said to me that when I said that, I'm not even gonna go into that. It was funny though. It was funny. I'll go into it another time. But anywho, so here we are. What have we learned thus far? Anybody who just came in or who was here before, please let us know what we have learned thus far. Yes. Hold on, I'm almost finished. I have to go in a minute. But what have we learned thus far? We're going to recap shortly. The Forgotten Connection. We have a number of articles that show that the early furnishing of melanated bodies to the specific colony of South Carolina came from the Caribbean, namely Barbados, Jamaica, Suriname, which is Guyana. Okay. And one of the things that stopped this forced migration of melanated bodies who were already enslaved in the Caribbean, who came from the continent, enslaved in the Caribbean, and later again enslaved in American soil, is because they were known, well, some, the Coromantee Negro, that's what I told you I was going to look up, namely, which was from a port in Ghana, were known for insurrections. And the slave masters were afraid of these insurrections, and thereby they wanted to stop bringing in this type of so-called Negro so that they wouldn't corrupt their present-day Negroes. So this cast a negative light on those who were coming from the Caribbean, namely Jamaica. Secondly, there was a different type of crop, a cash crop that they were going for in the Caribbean, which was rice, and so they were more inclined to go towards those who were coming from the continent who had exposure to said rice, and so they started bringing them in from the mainland. Thirdly, there was a tax levied on anybody who had 5 years or 5 months who had been in another colony. There was a tax levied where there was £3 a head if you were coming from straight from the continent, and £30 if you were coming from any place else. Okay, so that's what, 10. How much from 3 to 30? So the person who doesn't want to pay £30, say forget that, they're going to bring them in from the continent. Okay. Then we have this one again that's showing that connection. And then we have talking about the Gullah Geechee. And then we have the European who was attesting to the fact that there were varied amounts of different, quote, races, or I would say ethnicities or tribes amongst the Negroes, as well as the European, and that it was a diverse mix of people. Okay. So one more thing. Let's look at Coromantee. I'll make that another thing. I think I went kind of long. We'll come back and talk about Coromantee. We'll come back and talk about the insurrections. We come back and probably talk about some of the things that they were afraid of and why. So with that said, let me come to the comment section. Hopefully that was helpful. Any questions? Any comments? Shout out to everybody who's watching, who's tuning in, who's listening, who will be listening. Let me know if there's any questions or any comments that you had concerning this particular presentation. I think I have to go back. Let me grab the link and put that New York Times article concerning South Carolina. I think, oh no, I did the wrong thing. I think that sometimes we conflate the issue when we don't take the time to parse out actually what we're talking about. And this is what I found in having the discussion about what happened during slavery. Understand that each colony was like its own little country at one point. They had their own laws, which are now states, right? They had their own laws that governed. You had different code or slave laws in South Carolina than you did in Georgia, right? You had, so all of these, they were not like somebody told me to get on code. And if somebody's out there, feel free to help me to understand what that means. Because some of this new language, I'm like, huh? What does that mean? But there were different laws that governed certain places. And based on what happened in different places, for instance, like Virginia, based on what happened in Virginia, where a woman sued for her freedom based on the fact that she had a European father and a melanated mother, she sued for her freedom. And under English law, you follow the father, right? And so at that point, after that time when she won, do you know what they did? They changed the law. I have to come back and talk about it because her name escapes me at this point. So much in my mind. So there's so much in my mind that but I'll come back and talk. Her name is on the tip of my tongue, and but there's so much in my mind. But understand that they didn't have it all planned out. This was like some fly by the seat of your pants type mission, where depending on who's governing or what whether it was the Spanish or the French or the English, you're going to have a different culture even on the mainland continent. And hopefully I was able to illustrate that. Queen T says, I feel that all Africans deserve reparations, but based on where we reside, it should be different forms, and all countries need to meet those needs who participated and benefited from the slave trade. And this is not in question, Queen T. This is I don't question that. This, for me, this is not in question about what is owed and what happened. What is in question is the way in which we recollect history, the way in which we paint the narrative to attain what it is that we feel or think or that we deserve, right? That is what is in question for me. Our course of action, our methodology, because the way in which we go about it can do more damage than good if it's not based on truth. You see what I'm saying? And so this is what this is about to me. Like I showed those who came on earlier, this is what it's always been about for me, about the truth. And whatever we do with the truth from there is on us or on whoever who has heard it. But the way, like I said, the methodology has to be above board. We cannot go around saying things that are not founded. We cannot say things to say that, like I heard from I heard from Yvette Carnell specifically that their blood didn't bleed here and their bones are not buried here. And as someone said, we were all dispersed from different places. It's just at a different place in time. But to say that, it's not true. History shows us that that's not true. This short presentation shows us that that's not true. It shows us that the very bones of those who were enslaved in the Caribbean is the very first ones who settled this place, and blood was shed here and died here. So then we have to say, okay, boom, that's not true. Let's oh, no problem. No problem. No problem. I'm just saying, yeah, I agree with you that we need to have this discussion, like I'm saying, but we have to have it and informed, because I listened to and I shared on the comment board where I saw some people sharing a hearing, a judiciary hearing of reparations, I think back in the early 2000s, and I'm listening to the argument and I'm listening to the counter argument, right? And these are the things that we should study and listen to, those who came before us, where they possibly failed, where they fell short. Both on it, like I said, CARICOM is doing what they do concerning reparations throughout the Caribbean. That's not the question. The question is whether or not we have an accurate retelling of history. So hopefully we'll go forward. Like I said, do your own research, but we'll go forward a little bit more informed about what actually happened. And we don't just become emotionally invested in a narrative because we feel that it suits our agenda. Deborah says, I think the escape the jungle in Suriname. Well, yeah, they all call them all maroons. They call them all maroons. It's like a runaway word. Oh, that's so nice. Oh, I'm sorry. The baby brought me some Play-Doh. Oh, this is nice. Here, Papa. Here, take. Pop, what did you make? Everybody made that. Oh, that's nice. Everybody did. Thank you so much. So we'll come back again and talk about another topic. Keep commenting, keep sharing, keep having a discussion. Again, if you want to read slowly over the presentation, the link is in the box. So with that said, I gotta go do some stuff right now. Gotta go do some stuff right now. So any more questions or comments, leave it under the box, and we'll get back to you. Alrighty then. Uh-oh. Oh, thank you, Mama. Your brother just gave it to me. That's nice. That's pretty. You finished? You're gonna clean it up now? All right, y'all. Mommy said that's nice. That's pretty. All right then. You're welcome, sis. Pass it along. Pass it along now. Each one teach one. You know what I'm saying? So pass it along. Let's educate each other. Let's be respectful to one another. If nothing else, let's learn to be respectful. We can respectfully disagree. We don't have to attack one another. And you know what I'm saying? And if you don't do everything I say and everything I do, then you're my enemy. Like that, that's counterproductive. Huh? No, wait. That's counterproductive. You know what I'm saying? We have to, because you're going to have people, even amongst who you think is rocking with you, that's going to disagree. And we have to learn how to come to the table. This is why I speak about solonomics so much. This is why I speak about the art of communication, or why we don't vibe when we don't agree, because sometimes we lack active listening skills. We lack the ability to put ourselves in someone else's position. And then we don't want more information that's going to challenge the position that we've taken, because that means we're going to have to change. So instead of changing, we would rather attack the people who's saying, hey, wait a minute, there's something might be going on here. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to grow within ourselves and with our soul and with our consciousness to say, hey, you know what, brother, sister, I don't agree with you. Or, not think that everybody's trying to get what it is that you have. You know what I'm saying? That's a thought that someone has programmed you to think that because somebody's speaking, that means they're trying to come for my bag. Or I heard the terminology eat from my trough. We're not animals. Animals eat from troughs. What are we saying? You know what I'm saying? What are we saying? What are we thinking? And if we have resentment and indifference, some of us are being attracted to certain things because we already carry this baggage of resentment and indifference. There's already this tension from mainland melanated people and those who were dispersed throughout the Caribbean. There's already this tension that is happening. I was looking at an article, and I was trying to remember the article where a woman wrote, this is, remember, we talked about Barbados and Jamaica fueling the South Carolina at the beginning of the colony. There is people within the Caribbean who don't like Jamaicans, right? And there was a woman who wrote an article about what she was taught as a child in in Barbados about Jamaicans. So there are smear propaganda campaigns, not only just on this side of the waters, but even throughout the diaspora. And I have to go back and find that article because it was some time ago, that Jamaicans are this and Jamaicans are that, and why a lot of this is coming from the experience, number one, and some of it is coming from the projection of the slave master, who is saying, it's the same person who told you, oh, that hair is too nappy, but I prefer this hair. That hue is too dark, but I prefer this hue. This slave, this Gold Coast slave is preferable than the Angola slave. It's that same thought that we say, okay, if I'm going to be closer to the slave master, then I'm going to say the same thing he's saying. When I was young in this country, I was born here, okay, and Even some of the references to it was already in the culture. Some of the references to melanated people was already here who didn't come from here. You know what I'm saying? So for us to come to this discussion in 2019, pretending that it's one-sided, we have to be honest to say no, it is not one-sided. There are two sides that are contributing to, or at least three sides contributing to the discussion. And we have to be honest and willing to sit down at the table to be like, okay, historically, what has happened? What narratives did we assign to? How are we going to pretend that when you was little in school that you didn't hear stuff like African booty scratcher? How many people in the room has heard this thought process or this name to disparage somebody from the continent now as an African booty scratcher? How many people heard that growing up? How many people questioned where did that come from? And why would children use that as something to disparage someone else? Question. How many people heard? And here's another one that I had a question about. And I said I was going to go, but this just came back to my mind. How many people, concerning the numbers, I'm gonna give. I said something before about the community banking, but here's another thing concerning the numbers. Here's another stereotype. Remember, we're talking about stereotypes. Here's another stereotype. What is a stereotype about, namely Jamaican people who come to America? When you talk about liquid capital, we can't do justice to talking about liquid capital without talking about a stereotype. And I believe I was trying to remember if it was on Living Color, a Living Color, where there was a sketch. Does anybody remember that sketch from A Living Color? So when you look at the numbers, um, when you look at the numbers, okay, here we. Hopefully you can hear it. If you can't hear it, let me know if you can hear this. First one. Thank you, Sue. We have what? Many jobs. Let me know if you can hear this. Can you hear this? Can that be heard? Let me know if you can hear it. If not, we'll come back. That was the name of the skit from In Living Color. The name of the skit from In Living Color was Hey Man. Okay. And it says it's the Jamaican. Oh, you can't hear it. Okay. All right. So hold on. Let me pull it up on my phone. You can't hear it. Stand by. Because this is in our attempt to clear up some things that may be circulating around that we're not there, that is not being spoken about. Okay. And then I'll leave on this. Let me pull it up on my phone so that we can hear what the comedy is. Oh no, my phone died. As soon as I'm pulling it up on my phone, the phone died. So I'm gonna tell you what he's saying. The name of the skit, forget it. I'll just put the name of the skit in the box and then we'll come back and talk about it. The name of the skit was Hey Man. It's from America's hardest working Jamaican family, and how the fact that Jamaicans have many, 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 many jobs when they come here. So if we're gonna look at a study in Miami and talk about the Caribbean influence in Miami and talk about how you have what is it, $11 liquid assets to $200 for somebody from the Caribbean who's melanated, then we have to look at the habits of those who are coming from the Caribbean, and one of which is having multiple streams of income, even if they're low level multiple streams of income. So even if they need to clean a hotel room, or even if they need to work as a barber, or even if they need to drive a taxi, this is why they would have multiple streams of income and liquid cash on hand. We cannot say they're taking all of our jobs and not looking at the jobs that when they did come here, they were taking. That's not being intellectually honest when we come to the conversation. So all of these factors, all of these outliers need to be discussed so that we won't say we're going to project hate on them because they're stealing something from us, right? And then we won't be into this blind rage or this blind indifference and hatred for one another. And we can actually sit down at the table and have a discussion, each person understanding. And if the person wants to go off and do what they need to do for the demographic that they represent, then they can do that. But you don't have to disparage another people group in order to do it and then not give the full story behind it. And that's just my thought. Okay, you didn't hear, no problem. For some reason, when I play it on the while I'm on live, it won't let you hear. So all I'm gonna do is drop the skit in the box, so you can go down to the box and then you can check it out for yourself. All right, and we'll come back and we'll discuss it more. If you have any topics on these topics that you would like to discuss, like I said, I have many other things I want to discuss about the early abolitionists and this whole petition for, sorry, for freedom, for petitioning for the end of slavery. We're going to talk about that too. So with that said, I'm really going to log off this time. All right.